Good afternoon. How's everybody? Still awake? All right. So I think I have the best job of everybody here. And you'll know why in a minute. I hope you enjoyed the award ceremony as much as we did. Phil Olilla, Walter Mosley, and Scribd represent the best of our industry. And we at Bowker are proud to be a part of this event. I'm Beat Barblan, General Manager of Bowker. We've been members of BISG since shortly after it was founded. And we've supported this annual meeting since 2005. Now think about this. I was thinking about 2005. I didn't have any gray hair then. The fax was still going strong. The iPhone hadn't come out yet. Anybody remember a time before the iPhone? I couldn't live without it. Most of you know us only as the home of the ISBN. But like the BISG, we have evolved a bit since that meeting almost 20 years ago. Today, Bowker is a comprehensive publishing services organization offering an extensive catalog of tools to publishers large and small and others in the book industry. And we'd be happy to talk with you about any of your needs. We see both BISG and this meeting as a vital way to keep the industry connected, focused on solving problems and informed about parts of the business that can be forgotten or taken for granted. BISG's Industry Innovator Award recognizes an organization or individual who boldly reimagines what publishing is and can be. As you might expect, innovation takes many forms, and over its 11 years history, BISG has presented the award to startups like Bitlit and Trajectory, and this is not the right script I'm reading. I think there is a piece in here that doesn't belong. You know, I told Brian I was a little OCD and I'd have my own copy. Here it is. And I'm Swiss of origin. We're all a little OCD. So there we go. Here's the right one. You all know that Brian O'Leary is the executive director of BISG. Joining us in 2016, he makes a joke that he's now the longest serving male director in BISG history. The first director, Sandy Paul, served 25 years, a record Brian says he does not plan to break. We'll see about that. I'm a former member of the BISG board, and I can say something that no other current member of the board can tell you. I was on the board when we hired Brian O'Leary, and I think that might have been one of our finest moments. He joined BISG with more than 30 years of experience in publishing, both in line roles and as a consultant. Brian was a member who had already done work for BISG on a couple of projects, including a 2012 study of metadata use and modification that we still refer to when diagnosing problems in the industry. Before we hired him, Brian came to us with a plan to revive and support BISG committees, coupled with a significant increase in the amount of informational programming that BISG provided to the industry. In the almost 8 years since we hired him, Brian has certainly delivered on those two promises and more, and I think that deserves a hand of applause. Thank you, Brian. He's here today to help us close this 48th annual meeting of the Book Industry Study Group with a talk, Book Publishing Next, Changes We Want to See in the Book Industry. I'm looking forward to hearing his thoughts. Brian?
I don't talk at these meetings. This is actually the first time I've done it. When we were planning this session, Julie Blattberg, who really helped us wrangle the day together and does a fantastic job of it. She's done this with us several times. Initially suggested it, and I said out of hand, no, we're not going to do that. And Julie made the case that we're covering a lot of ground today that's never been covered before. BISG strategy, in part, the work that we're doing with supply chain, rights, and subject codes. These are all first time for us, and it might be useful to try and pull these pieces together. So Julie's really persuasive. I think first on the list, and it's really important to note, Bayot's right. When I started this job almost 8 years ago, it was with a promise that we would reinvigorate and expand the support that we provide for committees. And we do that to this day. We have 5 standing committees. We have 9 working groups. We're looking at a 10th. We're probably at the upper limit of what capacity would be for the ability to support that kind of that work. Our board is all volunteer, and you've met some of them today. Many of them have been involved in BISG committees, not just in the past, but even today. You've probably seen in passing the Tiara Brigade that's in the far corner. The workflow committee chairs in general get a tiara. I guess we have to continue to either do that or crowns for the next crew. But it's central to our mission. This is critical to what we try to do. And also, committees are vital for us for discovery and for problem solving. The committees meet, and you'll see this number in a moment. Joshua talked about it. We have 500 members that receive agendas every month, about 125, so an average of about 25 per committee come to the meetings live. We had a metadata committee a couple of months ago to primarily talk about accessibility and issues that we have with the implementation of the European Accessibility Act in the U.S. market, or its impact on U.S. publishers. We had 65 people on the call. We actually ran out of room to introduce all the folks who were new. They meet 60 times a year. It's a total of 90 hours of committee calls across the year. 36 of it just in subject codes. If you think of it, a day and a half of time spent in subject code conversations. And those are fascinating meetings, each one you go to. You can talk about cozies and cats and all sorts of things, but that's how this business gets done. It represents more than a man year or a person year of work every year for the last 8 years. And coupled with webinars that average about 30 for the past 7.5 years, so more than 200. And those are also learning opportunities. We hear just through the questions alone and the comments and the responses and the engagement, what's important to the industry. I mentioned that we have a lot of working groups. You see the list here. We added this year audiobooks best practices. We're hoping to make quick work of that in the first half of 2024. But we've also introduced since September things that seem like they're more sustaining. A working group on AI. I fought AI like there was no tomorrow. I wanted to know what we would say about AI or what we could do about AI. Before we created that group, but I think it's got a life of its own at this point. We're also focused on sustainability and ISNI, and we're thinking really hard about what to do about accessibility because it's a big topic, and the industry needs help there. So ahead of this meeting, you may have seen the survey. We asked the industry to tell us what changes you'd like to see in book publishing. There was lots of feedback, and what I did when we got the feedback is took some of the comments and grouped it by strategy items. So you heard before, inclusion, research, standards, and education. There were no shortages of ideas, a number of different things. An example under inclusion, good talk about diversity. That's important. We try to make sure that it's front and center for us, but it's easy to forget. I mean, we are a predominantly non-diverse organization. We've been trying to change it at the board level and at the committee level, and we need to continue to work on it. But there were also suggestions about structural changes in the industry, sustainability, and a reconsideration of roles. And I want to say, too, that if you find this interesting, we are going to post the slides for the entire day on the BISG website after this webinar. So, you'll have a chance to get a second look at it. Under research, there are a number of different topics that people thought about. Somebody wanted to know more about why advances that are outrageously large are as big as they are. Data quality, new sales models, and a focus on return, all things that we could do some work to better understand. With respect to standards, things like rights, this makes Chris Gleeman really happy. We have a really long paragraph about Onyx. I could have edited it, but it's about Onyx. So efficiency and standards, the things that you would expect. And then when it comes to education, there's a wish that we could get together more. I hope it's not a wish that we recreate Book Expo. I'm not sure that we're up for that. But there is an idea that we should just recognize that we're human beings in a human industry. We want to see one another more. So all of this taken together represents hundreds, if not more than hundreds, of comments, questions, agenda items, and more touch points throughout the year. Um, Couple that with tight relationships that we have with our colleagues at BookNet Canada, BIC, which is the Book Industry Communication, our companion organization based in the UK, Editora, which oversees Onyx and Thema. And we have increased through them, we have increasingly productive relationships with organizations around the world. We're known for both the work that we're doing and the work that we yet to do. But taken together, all of these give us a more informed view of the supply chain in the U.S. market. It's tremendous insight, but the question I regularly try to ask myself is, what good is insight without action? You know, we could be the smartest people in the room, but if we don't do something with it, how much better off is the industry? So last summer, I was having a conversation with Lauren Stewart, who I think is hiding somewhere in the back. Lauren works for BookNet Canada. She actually spoke on a panel last year at this meeting. And, you know, BookNet Canada in many ways is what I'd like BISG to be when we grow up. You know, it's much younger, BookNet's much younger than we are, but has a lot of advantages, and particularly in how it manages metadata. And Lauren was asking us to kind of give an update on what BISG for Tech Forum, their channel for innovation and publishing for the Canadian marketplace. She was asking us to kind of give an update, and I gave her kind of an out of the box, you know, these are things I could talk about. And she said, yeah, this is nice, but what are you really thinking about? What stuff have you never really talked to anyone about? And, you know, what is the future of the book business? And I just started blabbering because there are three things that inform what BISG thinks about when it works with committees, when it works on agenda items, when it tries to figure out what strategy looks like. And there are these three things. The first and the most motivating in many ways is that growth, we believe that growth in the North American publishing business is going to increasingly come from the sales and effective management of rights. It's not product sales. It's not to say that product sales go away, not at all. But the growth, which is what the industry needs, we're all feeling squeezed on margins, is probably going to come from better exploitation of rights. The second is if you believe that product sales are fundamentally flat or up a little, down a little over time, there's been great success, particularly on a unit basis over the last few years, pandemic related perhaps, but maybe people have returned to books. So it's up about 10% over 2019. But the reality is that for the prior decade, it was up and down, up and down. If you believe that product sales are fundamentally flat, then we have to become much more ruthlessly efficient in a flat to slightly down market. And a lot of our work on standards and best practices kind of is informed by that. And the third is that we need to be more consumer focused. So we need to have a better understanding of what consumers are actually looking for. And there have been some successes. I mean, it's easy to look at, you know, a startup that, you know, gains a lot of revenue in the near term and then fails because it doesn't operate as a book business. But I think that it is absolutely the case that we're going to have to know more about the business going forward than about the environment going forward than we do today. So these three things kind of sat in my mind. We actually did a presentation where we talked about the book industry supply chain and what we might do with it, and some of that is here. So, you know, the supply chain, as you've heard, we really are thinking expansively about it. We've always represented publishers, manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and libraries. as well as our industry service partners. We want to expand that to include authors and agents in some meaningful way. How we do that is still a thing that we'll work more on this year as part of that strategic plan. The roles and the structure of the industry vary by the type of publishing, so education and trade are not working exactly the same, but fundamentally we represent players in all of these spots. We measure success in a variety of ways, but the most important is transparency. Is it a level playing field? Ken Brooks asked the question earlier today, is there a secret sauce? Is it worth not sharing information? And, you know, I think it's almost always worth sharing information that's not proprietary in nature. Best practices increasingly are absolutely necessary, particularly if you believe that product sales are flat. You want to be as efficient as you can be. Things that improve product visibility, like BISG, now 30 plus years old. Things that improve revenue. Those are important parts of supply chain success. Efficiency is really important toward an end. I mean, we want to preserve the effectiveness of this business, but the ability to adapt and grow is also a critical piece. And the systems, and our argument fundamentally is that the systems that we have are at their limit. I might have to ask for your help on this. Doesn't seem to be advancing. Oh, there we go. So the current supply chain is not bad, all right? I mean, we live in it, we work on it, we try to solve problems that affect one or more parts of the business. But it was built in, it's an inert or physical products. That makes a difference. Our slow uptake of Onyx 3 in the US market, really a decade after it had been introduced, was a reflection of essentially separate physical and digital channels that are increasingly coming together. It does a pretty good job of managing most aspects of print sales and distribution, things like ordering, receipt and return, sales reporting. And it's certainly good at supporting orders between established trading players. There are instances, though, where it does fall short. We over-rely on a lot of legacy systems. Some of the stuff is 30 years old, sometimes more, 35. You know, a lot of times enterprise solutions are built with custom integrations at a time when it makes it hard to upgrade, and therefore only extends the amount of time that we're going to be spending trying to fix something. Interoperability among systems is hard, whether you're within a particular publishing house or across the industry. And there are no repositories. And the repository piece is important because, first, you don't have transparency without any access to it. And you also don't have industry-wide understanding. There's no feedback mechanism. If you're bad at producing metadata, somebody might fix it, or they might just publish it. But there's no mechanism in place to really get back to you and tell you that you need to do this better. There are plenty of houses where it's done really, really well. And there are plenty of places, and any distributor and or retailer will tell you who they are, or at least hint at that, where it's not done well at all. And there's not any good mechanism to change that. So we started thinking about what transforming supply chain communication would look like. And as you've heard, we had a meeting in January that kind of kicked that off, and we'll talk more about it in the second and in the balance of 2024. But there are 6 things that we kind of kicked around, and I want to kind of walk through those at a relatively high level to give you a sense of what the next 2.5, 3 years of BISG look like. So rights management. We had a 2021 study that died on the vine, really. It was a good study that confirmed strong returns. I mean, generally months for the ROI for a variety of rights investments. It's tough to invest in rights. The panel that Chris chaired today gave you a real world example of that, you know, because what you wind up doing is opening Pandora's box and finding out all the things you didn't do well the first time. Now you get a fix. But when you fix it, the ROI is really good. I think that, you know, the US and Canada are very strong markets, and they have great front lists and great back lists. And if product sales are flat, it's an opportunity to grow revenue. But things, even the simplest things, finding out who owns rights, acquiring desired rights, monitoring rights deals. They're all really difficult. And you heard a very good set of examples this morning. But I think a failure to invest in this area is going to limit revenue and potentially increase piracy. I mean, if people can't get to the right people to ask for permission and to pay for permission, they're going to go ahead and do the things that you don't want them to do. The repository piece is important. Bayat mentioned the 2012 study, which is my first. I'd done a little bit of work for BISG as a consultant, and it was my first big project independently with them. And one of the things that I came back with the recommendation was we were mapping the flow of metadata information throughout the U.S. Market. I said, this is just broken. This doesn't work, and it will never work. You will never fix this problem the way that we are structured because there's no feedback mechanism. We don't have a metadata repository, and we can't create one. It's not like BISG can just sort of one day say, well, we're BookNet. We're going to create the repository. You give us all your metadata. That's not a practical solution. Everybody's embedded. But there is an opportunity, I think, using the technology as well as existing relationships to create federated repositories so that you could look across the entire U.S. market and at least with some agreements on rights and permissions, get access to it. It would be akin to a distributor of record, somebody who has said, all right, this repository, if you want to know who to go to for metadata for this publisher, that's a small set of owners that we could manage. We have to figure out how to do that because I think that the current situation is just dumping a tremendous amount of information into the laps of important trading partners who are spending a lot of the time just cleaning up rather than actually capitalizing on the metadata. I think API calls would help. I'm not opposed to EDI. It's really good for large volumes of data, but API calls would allow us to kind of bridge the systems issue. We have lots of recipients who have their own structural issues with, it may not necessarily be legacy systems, but it's their own systems. And that's a challenge for us. So trying to figure out a way to get broader information, but at the same time, better access to that information. Payments clearinghouses, batch has been kicked around in the U.S. market. The American Booksellers Association did a lot of work on it. It hasn't really gotten traction. There are a number of intermediaries that are already trying to solve this problem or have solved it. Ingram is a good example. Baker and Taylor, IPG are trying to do some of that work. But there are a number of different issues in the U.S. market that, our conversations about this with folks like Ted Hill at MVB, there are a variety of different retail ordering systems. There's different protocols. Ted had a really good question earlier today about what do you do for the example of somebody who doesn't even have an ordering system, but is just using Square or Stripe or something that's not really built into it. So we have to figure out what that is. And I think our contribution there is if we're going to change it, we can provide a roadmap. Returns, somewhat related to the payments question because it would be great to be able to return based on specific orders or purchase orders and to measure it. This is something the UK tackled more than 20 years ago. At that time, KPMG had done some work and they estimated that the costs of returns in the UK market were the equivalent of what would be about $1 billion today in the US market. I think we've improved over time, so it's probably not as high as that anymore, but we still have a significant, there's somewhere in, depending on the accounts and the like, but there's still a significant, perhaps 15 or 20% return rate across the industry that we don't even know it is in part a sign of the problem, of the challenges that we face. The ideal thing, though, here would be that ideally the agreements could be automated. Not to say everything is just approved automatically, but rather that if things fall within specific windows of time, that it's not less than 90 days after you've bought it, and not more than 15 months after you've last ordered, that you can return it under terms. It doesn't have to be those dates, but it's something to at least take the exception out or to have some predictability. It starts to reduce discrepancies and maybe helps explain that strange allowance for returns that the rights panel talked about. Although I can't take responsibility for markets that are not ours. The last two, one is real-time data exchange. A lot of the legacy systems we have are good at one-way communication. EDI and X12, pretty solid, but business complexity has grown significantly, particularly with digital. So flat file reporting is less effective, particularly for digital. The lead times on reprints mean that you're better off being able to track pipeline inventory. You know, if somebody has something coming back to you and you don't know about it, it can dramatically affect your thinking about what you do for reprints. And that ultimately also touches on returns. Lags in sales reporting. There are some organizations and trading relationships that are better than weekly, but a lot of it is weekly, and so it's hard to track marketing impact. We're moving to promotion in a much more integrated way. So I think two-way communication is required, and it's an investment. That's not trivial. And then the last piece is integrating other parts of the supply chain. So we have some folks here today from the manufacturing community. Joe Upton is here, as well as Matt Baer, who's my counterpart at BMI. And we've been working pretty hard to try and figure out what improved forecasting looks like. We've done a lot of work on it in committee, particularly in supply chain. We've also spent a fair amount of time thinking through what kind of programming we can do to offer to the industry that breaks it down into something that you can take action on. But one thing is clear, which is that if you're going to do forecasting well, if you're going to be able to get the books you need when you need them, it requires clear communication with printers, distributors, and retailers. I've sat in conversations really hosted by Matt and BMI where printers said, I have no idea what books my clients are publishing. And I said, well, do you look at Onyx? And they said, well, I don't even know what Onyx is. So we have an opportunity here to open up a conversation about what print volume looks like just based on the data we have available. But we have to probably do a lot more than that. Those relationships need to be developed. And whenever you're crossing parts of the supply chain, it's building, it is a relationship. I mean, work gets done between me and Matt, largely because we know each other. We've spent much of we have about the same amount of time in our roles, and we know how each other operates. We have different responsibilities, but we try to at least work together. And the thing I keep coming back to, and it started, if there was a corollary to those three things, it was that publishing in North America is big for publishing, but small for everything else. I mean, the producer value of the entire publishing market in the U.S. maybe is $25 billion. Apple could buy that with its cash on hand 8 times over. We're not the industry that can afford to be sloppy. And I think that there's an opportunity we have in front of us to come together on this transforming supply chain initiative to build a stronger supply chain, but it's a reimagining of it. So I've been doing, as you heard, I've been doing this for almost 8 years. And I'm proud of the opportunity and really grateful for it. And I've heard a lot of different things about why this won't work. You know, fixing the plumbing is definitely not sexy. You know, people don't want to hear about supply chain. Not everyone will play. You know, there's a specific company in retail who's almost always mentioned. There's you know, people are fearful that we're stepping on various supply chain participants' secret sauce. It's hard to get the attention of decision makers. I mean, they're busy folks, and the argument for ROI is sometimes elusive. Resources are scarce. They're probably more scarce today than they have been in the past. And probably the most damaging, what we already have works well enough. We can throw bodies at it. You know, you don't know the opportunities you're missing. And then overall, there's a lack of trust. So these are all true. And, you know, I try to think about it. What have I learned over the course of doing this work? And the thing that came to mind when I was trying to think about this talk was actually some lyrics from, this is showing my age, a Talking Heads song, um, for- perhaps appropriately named Road to Nowhere. And it was there's a city in my mind. Come along and take the ride. It's all right. It's all right. And I think that that's kind of the motivating thing here, which is we can imagine it. And I think in imagining it, we can then start to figure out ways to make it possible. That's what you look to BISG to do. But we don't do it, as I think Joshua said ably before, we don't do it on our own. We do it through the work of our volunteers. They're the critical piece of the puzzle. We do have to grow. A two-person organization trying to tackle the entire supply chain in the US market doesn't work. But it doesn't have to be 50. We have a secret sauce. Our secret sauce is here and in our committees and in our working groups. So if we go back to those three premises, you know, growth in rights, a need for efficiency, and a need to be able to qualify what the consumer marketplace looks like in ways that are, and not just consumers, but the folks who are buying the book. I think those are all doable. I think that, and I think they resonate with folks when we've talked about it in small scale conversations. People kind of nod and they go, "Yeah, I could see that happening." But to take advantage of all of these things, we do have to change the infrastructure. We have to do it in a way that respects the incumbents and invests intelligently to get us to a better place. So I think that we started the day with the virtuous circle. James Miller is really happy now because he loves the virtuous circle. But I think that we can close with three thoughts. One is for BISG, it's still thinking. Maybe go ahead and just catch it. There we go. We have the right strategy. I think it's at the right time, and it's for an organization that was built to solve problems just like these. We're grateful for the opportunity, and thank you for being part of BISG.